Did I ever tell you about that time I sold a house that belonged to a Nazi? A few years ago, I got a sign call on one of my listings. It was by this lady who wanted to sell her home. So naturally, I book an appointment, go to her house, and run the appointment. And for all intents and purposes, this is a pretty normal appointment. I had no idea what I was gonna be running into. Sometime along the way, I would get these really random calls where she was incredibly angry. I mean, she was chewing me out. And this was the first time I kind of got a little cause for concern. And then she started throwing words like, tired of you Jews and this and that. Kind of cause for concern, but whatever. I continue working with her. Now, as I was working with her, she started sharing some stories. Like, she used to host parties at her home back in Germany that had SS people in it. I said, okay, well, that's kind of a weird thing to share with a person. And then I had my assistant, who ironically, you cannot make this up, is 100% German. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed. And at this time, I could not go to all my meetings and so on. I would ask my assistant to go. And so she would go to this particular meeting. She was taking photos. And my client was following her around. This is before we went live. My client was following her around and asking her about her history. Asking, who was in her family. And, more or less, how do I know for sure there are any Jews in your family? And again, this is kind of cause for concern, but I'm a starving realtor. Gotta make this work. And so we look back later on, and I am convinced, I didn't ask her this question, but I am convinced the only reason why she listed her house with me is because she could say with 100% certainty that I'm not Jewish. Then throughout the transaction, we heard some other things like HOAs out to get her because everyone on the board is Jewish. I could not believe my ears, but these are the people that we work with. But I learned something else interesting in this experience. I shared earlier that there are calls at odd hours where she would just chew me out. We get her home sold, we go under contract, and her daughter calls me and says, my mom is not mentally competent to sell her home. To which I said, okay, I am not gonna fight with this. If you feel like your mom is not mentally competent, we will halt everything. We will stop this entire thing, because if you believe that to be the case, I'm not going to argue this, right? Because there's been multiple flags here in this transaction. But what I learned in this process is that in order for her to exit the contract, she actually needs to be medically incompetent. She needs to be deemed by a professional that she is mentally unable to move forward with this transaction. So I reached out, talked to some elderly law attorneys, had her get in touch with all these attorneys to figure out what their options were. And at the end of it, what the daughter decided was it just wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth it to her to put her mom through this, not out of love. We learned later on that mom had burned all of her bridges with all of her children. So it wasn't out of love. She just decided it wasn't worth it to her to actually get mom out of this transaction, which we went for full market value, right? It wasn't worth it to her to get mom out of this transaction just because mom was difficult the whole way. So, but I learned, again, some valuable lessons here. First, how it works if you're trying to legally get out of a contract to go the route of being deemed mentally incompetent. But man, you also learn what a desperate realtor will do in the times where you need the business and you're dealing with a person that normally you would never talk to. So I can't say for sure she was a Nazi, but she showed me photos of her hosting parties with SS people. I don't know what you call them exactly, but it was, again, really interesting. And that's one of my crazy stories in this real estate business.